I was driving out east on I-70 yesterday morning and got me thinking about road trips. And inevitably, when I start thinking about road trips, I start thinking about all the time that we spent driving across Kansas as a kid. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure, but it's 400 miles across, and there's no turns, and it's a lot of corn. It's just you get on, and it is just one straight line. Most journeys in life aren't like that. Most journeys, there are turns along the way, which means at some point you're not headed straight towards the destination. Or maybe there's a detour, or there's a stop at a roadside attraction. Maybe you get lost. But even if your car is temporarily headed in a different direction, you're still headed towards the destination, right? Even if you have an accident that delays you for a day or a week, you're still headed towards the destination. On one of our trips, our car broke down, and we spent a day at the Volkswagen dealer in Fort Smith, Arkansas. We aren't going anywhere, but we were still headed towards the goal. We were still en route. And I want you to think about that image when we think about heaven. Heaven is the destination, but we're not always headed straight towards it. Anybody ever feel like you're occasionally on a detour, or maybe you're stuck in traffic and you're not progressing? Maybe you feel like you've had a wreck and the car's in the shop and you wonder if you'll ever get closer, or maybe you feel lost. You're driving in circles. Sometimes in travels you think you know where you're going, and then you pass the same gas station for the third time and you realize you're lost and you didn't even know it. Life is like that. Sometimes we think we're following Jesus, we think we're drawing closer to God's kingdom, and then something breaks in and we realize we're just going in circles. And so the goal for today, we talk about heaven as eternal life, where God has perfect fellowship with God's people. And I also want to talk about the things we see and witness in this life and how they point us towards the life that is to come. Ultimately, the new creation is the redemption of all things. Paul talks about this in Romans 8. All of creation is groaning, waiting to be released from bondage to decay. Creation wasn't made to decay, but sin has introduced that. And creation itself has the memory of what it once was. It's sewn into the very fabric, and it's longing for the day when things will be set right. Notice how this looks in Revelation 21. The new creation is a world made new. There is continuity between this world and the next. Jesus, just as we talked about our bodies as being made new but still connected to our old bodies, so too the rest of creation is made new. And with the world made new, there's no more death, no more mourning, no crying, no more pain. Everything that causes suffering in this world will be wiped away. Death itself, Paul tells us, is swallowed up in victory. The resurrection of Jesus Christ, it serves as the guarantee that death doesn't have the final say. And notice how these things that cause pain are conquered. Revelation has a lot of grand and cosmic gestures that take place throughout, but when it comes to removing pain and suffering from the lives of God's beloved, how is that dealt with? God himself wipes away every tear from their eyes. It's tremendously personal. It's tremendously intimate. What it gives us is a glimpse into the tenderness of God in the midst of our heartache. When we suffer, when we ail, when we weep, when we mourn, and all of these times, it's not because God has forgotten about us, but instead God is tenderly pulling us towards himself, longing for the day when the new creation will come in fullness and we will dwell in perfect fellowship with God, ringed around the throne, as we talked about. So think of God's tenderness when we are in pain. We know it's a chapter in a greater story where the end has already been written. And it doesn't alleviate the pain in the moment, but it helps keep us from spiraling into despair along with that pain and heartache. Also, think about God's invitation into perfect fellowship and all of those times when you feel lost. We've all been there. We've had days, weeks, months, periods where we feel uprooted, disjointed, where we feel like everything doesn't fit together. We wonder why we don't feel comfortable anywhere, and we feel like we're, trying to build this house of straw in the midst of a storm. And we have such a hard time hanging on. And in that, hear Jesus' promise in John 6. He tells us there are many rooms in his Father's house, which is meant to be a reminder of God's abundance. Heaven isn't a place of scarcity where we have to fight for our place. It's a place of abundance where there is enough for everyone. But it's more than just a place. Remember, it's a relationship. Jesus himself is coming back for us. He tells us that he's gone ahead to prepare a place for us, and he's coming back to take us there himself. We don't have to fear exclusion. We don't have to fear rejection in all of those times that you are afraid. No matter what the reason is, think of the image of Jesus coming back for you. I was running this race yesterday, and you turn down a path into the woods, and we started this huge hill. And I was almost at the top when I heard yelling, and I turned around. One of the race directors was chasing after us because we had missed this turn, and we were in danger of getting lost. So he came after us to ensure we were headed in the right direction. And as I was looking at that, I was like, that's the gospel message. That's how I think of Jesus. He so often sees us headed in the right direction. He knows how easily we get lost. And so he comes himself to bring us into the fullness of God's loving embrace, even when we're lost, even when we're headed in the wrong direction. We're still on the overall journey. We're still headed towards the destination because of the work that Jesus Christ has done, because of the care that he has for us. I think about the disciples. They get so many things wrong throughout the Gospels. 3 years into Jesus' public ministry, he spent countless days teaching with them. He's performed who knows how many miracles in their sight, and yet they still weren't certain enough to know that he was the Messiah, right? Because when Jesus was arrested in the garden, did they stay by his side and pledge not to be afraid because they were confident in his power over death and the powers of the world? No. They ran to save their own lives. But something happened to that motley group of fishermen and other outcasts. They witnessed something on that first Easter morning that so profoundly shaped the way they lived their lives, and they were no longer afraid of anything or anyone. They saw something that led them to a confidence that enabled them to proclaim, in the face of any power in the world, that Jesus Christ was Lord. They were not afraid of anything. Clearly, they had a confidence that Jesus was who he said that he was, that he had the desire and the ability to prepare a place for them on the other side of death and come back for them. Their lives were changed. They weren't afraid because they had the hope of heaven firmly planted in their hearts, and they had the confidence to believe that it was real. And they lived and they died in light of that. It transformed them. And that's been my hope for this series on heaven, that I hope that what you've learned about heaven plants a vision in your own hearts, that you'll believe that Jesus has greater plans for you, that wants to come back for you, that God has this desire to tenderly wipe away any memory of suffering. May it sink into the depths of our hearts that we may be transformed, so that the suffering that we inevitably encounter in the world doesn't drive us to despair, but reminds us that we, along with all of creation, are on a journey, and the destination is certain, that Jesus has secured that. So may that suffering that we encounter, may the fears that we discover, may the sense of being lost, may it remind us that we were made for another world, and that Jesus will ensure that we see the fullness of that world with our resurrection eyes. And so may that help us to live as a people transformed, as a people consistently encouraging one another, lifting one another's eyes towards the hills from whence our help comes, and reminding and helping us remind one another of the tenderness of God.